Okay, I'm just holding this up just to show you where I am, just outside the Garrick Theatre, outside the National Portrait Gallery where I first started storytelling, and I'm going to find a quiet corner now and tell you a story. Okay, so here I am. I am in London, and I'm just here for a couple of days doing some exciting stuff, and this afternoon I'm going to see the Christmas Carol directed by Phelan McDermott, who's a brilliant director, so I'm quite excited. I'm just outside the stage door and I'm going to tell you a quick story and then I'm going to go in and see the show. Ooh, and I'm really scared about telling this story because it's kind of it's had me this week. It's kind of slapped me about the face and said, "Who do you think you are telling this story?" So I'm going to tell it to you, and then I'm going to record it again, maybe in the autumn when I've journeyed with it through a few seasons, and maybe tell it with a musician. And hope you like it. And great humility to the mythology and magic of this story. Once upon a time, there was a queen. She was gorgeous. She was powerful. She had broad, flat feet that centered herself to the ground, and she had a strong nose and piercing eyes, and she was everything that was beautiful in this world. Her heart was juicy and her soul was energetic. And so she attracted a king who was meaty and joyful and truthful and vulnerable. And they had a child, and it was a boy. So exciting for them. They looked at each other and they loved each other. And don't get me wrong, it was hard in the beginning. Even though they had, loads of support, it still brought up those places for them that they were trying to hide, those inner child places. But soon enough, the queen was pregnant again, another boy, and then again, boy, and again, another boy. And by the fourth boy, or when the fifth boy come, she couldn't help but just have a flicker of disappointment before her heart melted in love with that child. And then the fifth boy and the sixth boy, and they all noticed, just as they were about to land and be completely welcomed in this world, they noticed a flicker across her eyes, a faint something. And then her seventh child was indeed a girl. Cause for great celebration that they did have a girl. 6 beautiful boys and a girl. But unfortunately, 7 children is a lot for any womb to bear, even the juiciest. And so the queen did die. And so without a mother to really hold her, without a mother to really hold the boys, and with a king in despair, they were left to work out many of their woundings amongst each other, and one of them particularly was not letting the girl do anything. They would say, "You can't because you're just a girl," or they'd say, "It's not for you, it's not for girls, this game's not for girls. I don't want to play with you because you're a girl." And she was really, really, really fed up with it. And the king, in his grief, he went on a big journey, kind of left the children and went on this big journey to hunt a stag. Now I think he was really kind of going after some part of himself, some virile, powerful, beautiful, majestic part of himself. But he went off into the endless forest of the kingdom to search and search and search and search until he broke, and he wept, and the moss and the ancient oaks, they held his tears and they soothed him, and then when he finished crying, when he had cried all the tears in his broken heart, then he couldn't find his way out of the woods. He was just completely at sea. His queen had always been his compass, and without her he could not find his way out. So he saw a man in the woods. And this man, he had a dark stone look in his eyes, but his smile was ready enough, and he said, I'll show you the way out of these woods. I'll lead you all the way back to your kingdom. But of course you'll marry my daughter, won't you? And he invited his daughter out from behind the tree, and she was beautiful, but she still had the same penetrating blankness about her eyes. And the king, he was just so desperate to go home and to hold his children and to be somewhere familiar. He agreed. And so he went back, but it wasn't lost on him, this look. So when he came back with his new wife, he went to see the witch of the palace, and he spoke to her. And she tuned in all the ways that she tunes in. And she said, I don't think your children are safe with this woman. And she gave him a magical ball of wool, a kind of thread that you could roll out, and you could hide something, and whenever you rolled the thread out, it would lead you straight there, And he thought, wow, this would have been really handy, when I was lost in the woods. Why didn't I have it then? And she smiled at him and said, you weren't ready for it then. You're ready for it now. So he hid his children deep, deep, deep in the woods. And when he wanted to go and see them, he would roll out this thread and he would go and see them. And he would play with them. And it was painful because the way that they laughed sometimes and the looks on their faces, they would sometimes remind him of his queen that he had lost. But the sorrow was such a sweet sorrow because it opened his heart. And he would come back and he would be light and he would be private, and he would be in a place in himself that the new queen did not understand. And so she was jealous and she was curious, and she followed one day the king, and she saw what he did with the wool, and she thought, right, well, we'll see about these children. And in the depth of the darkest death moon, she made a potion. She made a potion of nettle root and mugwort, of mandrake and swan blood. And she threw that thread out, and she followed it all the way to the little place in the woods where the children were. And the boys started running out of the door because they could hear footsteps, and they shoved the girl and they said, you can't come out yet, you're just a girl. And so she sprayed her potion, she threw it, and then she, with her wings, like this all over the boys, and they immediately turned into swans. And it was so powerful and such a magical and fierce moment that she got quite scared herself, and she gathered up the thread and she threw it into the lake and she went home. And she didn't know that there was a girl. She didn't know that there was a girl that was still in that cottage. And so the boys had been turned into swans, 6 white swans. And the girl watched them circle about the cottage. She watched them fly away and come back with their heads bowed. She watched them, and at midnight they turned back into boys. And they said, we have 15 minutes a day, dear sister, just 15 minutes a day as humans, and then we have to assume our swanness. We have to assume our wings. And she said, there must be a way to break the spell. And they said, you can't break this spell. You are just a girl. And she looked at them and she said, how do I break the spell? And they said, you have to be silent for 6 years. Do not let a word pass your lips. And on every full moon, you need to gather green, bright green nettle leaves and stalks and weave with them 6 tunics. And by the end of the 6 years, if we wear those 6 tunics, we will be able to go back to being boys, to being brothers, to being men. But you can't do it. She did not reply. She did not speak. She did not utter a word. Because she was a girl. Because she was powerful. Because she was determined. She began to gather by the full moon those nettles. And she weaved and spun and sewed. Weaved and spun and sewed. And those nettles, they were prickly and they felt harsh, but they gave her an invigoration. They gave her an energy that allowed her to keep going night after night, spinning and weaving and sewing and spinning and weaving and sewing. And a king from another kingdom was walking past the cottage one day. And she was sitting on a stool outside, making one of the boys' tunics. And he saw her and he said, "This is soul work. This is deep soul work." She did not answer. And he said to his women and his men, he said, "Invite her to the court. Invite her to be under my protection whilst she continues this, whatever silent work she is doing." And so he did, and she lived very simply, but she was comforted by the people around her. And her brothers had given her feather after feather, so she had a beautiful feather bed. And sometimes at night she would walk out and she would meet her brothers for 15 minutes, longing to speak to them. But she knew that she could not. So she would come back after her 15 minutes and she would continue making her tunics. But the king had a mother who had never been queen. And she saw the king and the way that he took care of this young woman who was doing some kind of magic that she did not understand. And the mother was furious. She said, "This should not be. She is working deep magic. She is working dangerous magic here. This should not be." And she caused such a furore and such a fuss that when the king was away, a great pyre of fire was built, and there was talk of burning her upon it. And so they seized her and they pulled her out of where she was, just as the moon began to burst into its fullness on the 6th year of her trial. Just as her brothers began to circle and fly around her, they tried to protect her with their swan selves, and she was clutching some tunics and just trying to finish one of them, trying to finish it. She began to throw the tunics on the brothers, one after another, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tunics fell onto 5 swans, and they became into her brothers once more, and she just threw the last tunic in the air. And as she threw it, a sleeve began to unravel, and as it landed on the boy, as he turned into, one of the sleeves was so far unravelled that he had a swan's wing. And forevermore he had a swan's wing. But the girl, she was allowed to talk. And she looked at the mother and she told her of all that she had been doing and all that had happened, and her sincerity and her honour and her determination melted the heart of that queen. And the king came home, and they waited until that funeral pyre had burnt almost to the ground, very low, and they jumped over it one at a time so that they could signal and say to all the spirits and all the elements, "This is a new chapter now. We are having a new chapter in our lives." And that's the story of the 6 swan brothers. And told fast and furiously in this big city of London, and I hope to tell it again in a different setting. So do share these stories, and if you've got any comments or any requests, let me know. All right, bye-bye.